Today's daf is daf Lamed Zayin. We started the Mishnah yesterday on daf Lamed Vav and Beis called mitzvah she tluya ba'aretz, and any mitzvah that is described and categorized as tluya ba'aretz is no heges only in Eretz Yisrael. Now the Gemara wants to know my tluya, my she'ena tluya. The Mishnah differentiates between tluya b'Eretz Yisrael and eina tluya b'Eretz Yisrael. If we're going to assume tluya means the tzibah bia. Like, for example, the Torah says in many parashiyos, ki savo ela aretz, as the introduction, or the Torah says, v'haya kiviyacha, that's called and classified as a mitzvah tluya ba'aretz. However, u she'ena tluya lo chsiv bia, there was no introduction of ki savo el ha'aretz. Then, v'arei tefillin u'peter chamor d'chsiv ben bia is noagim bein, yet they apply both Eretz and b'chutz laretz. So the Torah in the parasha of Tefillin in Parashas Bo says Kadosh li kol b'chor peter kol rechem and v'hoy l'chol l'totfos al yadecha, and the Torah speaks about bia ki v'yacha Hashem, both with regard to peter chamor and with regard to Tefillin, and yet these two mitzvahs are no haggis bein ba'aretz bein b'chutz laretz. And the Gemara is not going to tolerate now that these two are exceptions to the rule. Amar Rav Yehuda Hachikama, Kol mitzvah she'ichovas haguf. It's not dependent upon whether you find ki savo el arts or ki v'yacha in the pasuk, but rather is it a chovas haguf? And for example, Shabbos is a chovas haguf, Tefillin is a chovas haguf, Avodah Zarah, Petach Hamor, Bris Milah, Arayos. These are all chovas haguf, no hagos, and they apply bein ba'aretz bein b'chutz laretz. But if the mitzvah is tluya v'karka, chovas karka, for example, chal, truma, maseh, or leket, shikha, and peah, and many others, is einin oheges ela ba'aretz. It only applies in Eretz Yisrael, not in chutz laretz. And the Gemara now asks me non-immediately, how does the Tana know that we make this fundamental distinction between a mitzvah that's a chovas haguf as opposed to a mitzvah that's chovas hakarka? The former applies anywhere, and the latter only in Eretz Yisrael. The Tana Rabbanan, we learned to the Brisa, and this is also the Sifri on the pasuk in Dvarim Perek Yud Beis. Elachu kiva mishpatim asher tishmu lasos ba'aretz. So we got to emphasize the word ba'aretz. Asher nasan Hashem Elokei avosecha l'chol l'rishto kol hayomim asher toch hayim al ha'adamah. And now we have to emphasize the two words al ha'adamah. So the Bryce is going to explain Eila hachukim, Eila midrashos. The phrase Eila chukim alludes to those dinim that are not explicit in the Torah, but are derived by the Chachamim through drashos, through midrashos. And then the pasuk says, after Eila chukim veha mishpatim, Elu hadinim. Those are the laws, the civil laws that are written in the Torah. And then the pasuk goes on and says that Asher Tishmerun, Zohar Mishnah, which means Liman Torah. Lasos is Maisa, Kima Mitzvahs. Ba'aretz, I might think that what does Ba'aretz mean? Kol Mitzvahs Kulam, Lo Yehei Noagim El Ba'aretz. There is a Ramban, by the way, that seems to say such a thing. Is Talmud Loma, and the Torah says, Kol Yom Asher Tem Chaim Al Ha'adama. And there's a fundamental difference between Aretz and Adama. Aretz is referring to Eretz Yisrael. Adama is a reference to Kol Mokom Shatem Chaim V'Kayomim. That's Adama. So that from the perspective of Eretz, we might come to the conclusion that all the mitzvahs depend upon Eretz Yisrael. But since the Torah says Al Adama, it teaches you Bein Eretz Yisrael, Bein B'chutz laretz. Ve'i Kol Hayomim, and in the Torah we should have just written the pasuk Kol Hayomim Asher Atem Chaim Al Adama. Why didn't the Torah just leave out the word ba'aretz? The word ba'aretz is only confusing us. Yachol, I would have thought, Yehinogim be ba'aretz be b'chutz laretz, tamalon ba'aretz. So it means that there are mitzvahs that are limited and restricted in their application to Eretz Yisrael. And had he not written the word ba'aretz, if we just would have relied on hadama, we would have said that all mitzvahs are in the same category. But Ba'aretz teaches me that no. There are mitzvahs that are not like Kol Adama mitzvahs. al hadama mitzvahs, which apply anywhere in the face of the globe, but rather ba'aretz, mitzvahs that are specific and limited, restricted to Eretz Yisrael. So tzei masha amar be'inyan. We now have to figure out and navigate through this issue, which mitzvahs apply only in Eretz Yisrael, and that's called ba'aretz, and which mitzvahs should apply bein ba'aretz, bein b'chutz la'aretz, and that's al hadama. And we're going to learn it from Masha Asa Be'inyan. Let's go to the context of the Torah. The context of the Torah, when it says Kol Hayomim Asher Atem Chaim Al Hadama, which means all over the world, that's in the context of Ibud Avodah Zarah. It says Abei Ta'abdin Eskol HaMakom Asher Avdu Sham HaGoyim. You have to destroy the idols, etc. And it seems like this mitzvah of destroying the idols, the Avodah Zarah, the Meshamshei Avodah Zarah, that is noheges b'chol makom, because the Torah says es kol hamakomos, and the Torah says hadama, kol hayomim v'shatayim chayim al hadama. So ma avodas kochav, now avodas kochav becomes the paradigm, and miuchedes shichovas haguf, it has nothing to do with the karka, and noheges bein ba'aretz bein b'chutz la'aretz. And the Ramban says that the Isra Avodah Zarah is not mentioned in the Pasuk. The Pasuk is being Osek, is dedicated to the mitzvahs Akira ve'ibud Avodas Kochavim, to uproot and destroy Avodas Kochavim. And that mitzvah only applies in Eretz Yisrael. And yet, paradoxically, the Gemara is using Avodah Zarah as a paradigmic example of something that's not a Chovas Karka and applies anywhere in the world. So Ramban says that the Kavodas HaGemara is from Hakrova B'Bomos, that at the time of Heter Bomos, before the Mikdash was built in Yerushalayim, and that's written in the next part of the pasuk, says Lo Tasun Kein Lashem Elokechem, and the Iser Bomos is noeg even in chutz la'aretz. So really, you could, in a sense, scratch out the words avodas kochavim, and in the place of avodas kochavim, you can put in bamos. Is af kol shehi chovas haguf, no heges bein ba'aretz bein b'chutz, but a mitzvah which is a chovas karka, not a chovas haguf, is limited and restricted to Eretz Yisrael bilvad. So basically, to sum up, we have both ba'aretz and al hadama, and they seem to be moving in opposite directions. How do you reconcile them? Either it's al hadama, which means anywhere in the world, or it's ba'aretz only in Eretz Yisrael. And the answer is it's going to depend upon whether it's a chovas haguf or a chovas karka. Iboilahu. Now, to appreciate Iboilahu, we review the Mishnah, and you'll see it here on the top line in Daf Lamed Zayin. We mentioned it yesterday. That Rabbi Elazar Omer, and Rabbi Elazar is of the opinion against the Tanakama that Chadash is Asur even in Chutz La'aretz. And the Chacham would hold that Chadash is an Isra Atoli B'Karka, and therefore it's only noeg in Eretz Yisrael. Iboilahu Rabbi Eliezer L'Kula Polig O L'Chumra Polig. When Rabbi Eliezer wants to say, as far as Chodesh is concerned, and take Chodesh out of the bag, so to speak, and disagree with the Tanakama, is he saying that the Isur Chodesh is only in Eretz Yisrael, and there's no Isur Chodesh in Chutz La'aretz? Or is he saying, on the contrary, that L'Chumra, the Isur Chodesh, applies even in Chutz La'aretz? Now that's true for Orla and Kilayim. Orla and Kilayim are mitzvahs hatluyos ba'aretz, but they apply even in Chutz La'aretz. And even though it's a mitzvah hatluyos ba'aretz, it applies in Chutz La'aretz. And the same is true if you hold l'chumra polig for the Shita Rabbi Eliezer with regard to Chodesh. And that's the chumra here, that even though Chodesh is a mitzvah tluya b'karka, nevertheless, it's noheges even in chutzlarts like Orla Kalayim, which are also Chovas Karka, yet they apply in chutzlarts. And the Gemara answers L'chumra Poli. We're going to assume that Rabbi Eliezer is machmir and implies the Yisur Chodesh anywhere on the face of the map. V'hachi kamer Tanakam. Chutz min ha'orla min ha'kalayim d'hilchas ha'gemirale. We have Allah Moshe Sinai that these two Isurim Lavim, which are totally Bakarka, on Ohogos, Bein Baretz, Bein B'chutzorets, Afal Gav de Ikal Meimar. Even though logically, if we had to classify or Kalayim, we certainly would classify it as a Chovas Karka, and therefore we would have restricted its application to Eretz Yisrael. And for that, I need the Hilchas Gemirale, the Allah Moshe Sinai, in the cases of Orla and Kalayim, to teach us that hey Noagos Bein Ba'aretz u Bein B'chutzlaretz. Aval Chadash. There's no halacha with regard to Chadash. We don't have the Hilchas Gemirale on Chadash. Is therefore Be'eretz in B'chutzlaretz lo. Chadash now falls into the classic frame or category of a mitzvah tliyus b'karka, and therefore it should only apply in Eretz Yisrael. Is my time. So why do we say that that if the Isur Chadash is to be understood classically as a Chovas Karka, therefore it's ain't noig b'chutzot el Eretz Yisrael b'ufad. But the pasuk says b'chol moshvos sechem, which implies that anywhere where the Jewish people live, that's where there's an Isur of Chadash, b'chol moshvos sechem. So the Torah is basically saying that anywhere where the Jewish people settle and they live, they are included in B'chol Moshvos Sechem, and therefore the Isur Chadash. So again, just to reiterate the Gemara's kasha here is, if you have a hilchsa gemirale, that's something that's a chovas karka, is no heges even b'chutzlarts like Orla Kalayim, fine. But in the case of Chadash, you don't have a hilchsa gemirale. So how do you know that despite the fact that it's an Isur hatoli b'karka, never it's knowing even in chutzlarts? And the answer is b'chol moshvos sechem. So that means you have to be mekayim the Isur even in chutzlaretz. However, the Gemara suggests now that b'chol moshvos sechem means something totally different. Ella says the Gemara Moshav li achar Yerusha v'yeshiva mashma. The Torah, when it says Moshav, is referring that to the din that even in Eretz Yisrael you're not chayiv in the mitzvah until after what's called kibush v'chiluk, the 7 years when Yoshua was involved in kibush, and the 7 years of chiluk, of divvying up amongst the Shiftei Yisrael the land of Israel after the kibush. So we're saying now that the mitzvah of Chadash is not no heges b'chutz la'aretz. It's a mitzvah tluya ba'aretz. It's a mitzvah tluya b'karka, and it is restricting its applications to Eretz Yisrael. Oh, so now we understand that Rabbi Eliezer is coming l'chumra. Also, Eliezer l'meim l'chumra. Af Chadash is noeg bein ba'aretz u bein b'chutz la'aretz. My timer b'chol makom shatem yoshvim. So Rabbi Eliezer holds that when it says Moshav or Moshvos Sechem, it's telling you that wherever the Jews settle, whether it's in Eretz Yisrael or in Chutz La'aretz, they have to be noeg the Isur Chadash. So that's called L'chumra Polik. And Rabbi Eliezer is telling us that Chodesh is noig b'chol moshvol seich b'chol mokum shatem yoshev, even in Chutz La'aretz. Now the Gemara goes on to another possible alternative tzad. O dilma l'kula Polik. Maybe Rabbi Eliezer is cholik on the Tanakama l'kula. V'hachi korba Tanakama chutz min ha'orla v'kelayim v'hilchus ha'gemirle v'kol shkein Chodesh. And how much more so Chodesh is noeg, despite the fact that it's Chovos Karka, in Chutz La'aretz. Why? Because according to Tanakama, Moshav, Kol Mokom Shatem Yoshvim Mashv. Now, when it says Moshvol Seichem in the Chiyuv of Chodesh, it means Kol Mokom Shatem Yoshvim. So where's L'kula Polig? The Chachamim hold that from the word Moshav, we're going to derive the conclusion that Chodesh, despite the fact that it's Tluya Ba'aretz, B'karka, is no Heges even in Chutz La'aretz. And if you'll ask me, okay, Chodesh is noeg even in Chutz La'aretz, then that's not what Rabbi Eliezer says. Rabbi Eliezer says that Chodesh ain't noeg ela ba'aretz. And the word Moshav, according to Rabbi Eliezer, is teaching me Liachar Yerusha V'Yeshiva. Now, if Rabbi Eliezer is telling me that Chodesh is only noeg at Eretz Yisrael, and that's called L'kula Polig, then how do we understand the word af? Right, Rabbi Elazar Omer af hachodesh. L'chora, he's adding another chumrah. That's just like we had a chumrah in Orla Kalayim that's noeg in Chutzot, so to chodesh. But what's af hachodesh? Because now we're interpreting that Rabbi Elazar is l'kula. So what's af hachodesh? And the Gemara answers Akamaisa. According to this interpretation, then Rabbi Eliezer is mechaven ala din. What din? It says at the beginning of the Mishnah, Kol mitzvah tluya ba'aretz, no heges ba'aretz. And on that, Rabbi Eliezer adds the comment that even Chodesh is included in this principle of no heges ba'aretz. So at the beginning of the Mishnah, it says, Kol mitzvah tluya ba'aretz, no heges ba'aretz. On that, we have the addendum, the tag on of Rabbi Eliezer, that even Chodesh is only noeg in Eretz Yisrael. So that's the suffix. We don't know which way Rabbi Eliezer is going, which way the wind's blowing. L'kula l'chum. Toshma di Omer Abaye, man tana de poligalei de Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Shmuel. Which Tana argues against Rabbi Eliezer of our Mishnah with regard to Chodesh? That's Rabbi Shmuel. The Sanya we learned in the Brisa. Now this Brisa is addressing the mitzvah of Nisachim, and the Brisa says L'lamdecha, when it says Moshav in the Parsha of Nisachim, and we certainly assume that what's going on over here is that the mitzvah is only applicable after Yerusha V'Yeshiva. Shekol Mokom shenever bo Moshav eino el yacher Yerusha V'Yeshiva divrei Rabbi Shmuel. Okay, then so the din and the mitzvah of Chodesh only applies after Yerusha v'Yeshiva. Amalo, Rabbi Akiva asks the following question and raises the objection to Rabbi Shmuel. Kate said, how can you possibly say that whenever the word Moshav is used, it means not for a specific mitzvah, but rather to teach you that it's only knowing after Yerusha v'Yeshiva. Varei Shabbos never b'mosh v'osechem. What do you do with Shabbos? I mean, Shabbos is knowing even in Chutzlar. So how are you going to explain the fact that in the Torah and Shabbos uses the same terminology? So again, even though Shabbos has b'chol mosh v'osechem, nevertheless no heges bein b'aretz bein b'chutzlar. Now the Torah says lo savaru eish b'chol mosh v'osechem b'yom Shabbos. And the Pnei Yeshua says that Rabbi Akiva proves from the mitzvah of Shabbos shehi no heges b'chol makom. What does that mean, b'chol makom? And basically, what Rabbi Akiva is arguing is that it's Eina Tluya b'Yerusha v'Yeshiva, and even already in the Midbar, they were already observing the Shabbos, hence the Makosha Sheitzim was put to death for violating the Shabbos. So why does it say Moshav in this particular context? And it must mean that it's B'chol Makom Shatem Yoshvin. And for that, we're going to extrapolate that whenever the Torah uses the word Moshav, it means Kol Makom Shatem Yishav Yoshvin. Amalei. So now that Rabbi Akiva has proven that the meaning of the word Moshav is B'chol Makom Shatem Yoshvin, is Rabbi Shmuel owes him an answer. And he says, Shabbos, Kal v'chomer Asya. How do we know that Shabbos is no Heges even in Chutz La'aretz? It's not from the word of Moshe. But rather with a Kal v'chomer from Shar Mitzvahs. Sheken. Ma mitzvahs kalos no agos bein ba'aretz ubein b'chutz la'aretz is Shabbos chamira lo kolshken. You have mitzvahs that are relatively kalos. I mean, the punishment is not a capital punishment for shar mitzvahs, and the Torah was machmir, but it's only on a one-time basis. So again, let's just go over the Kal v'chomer one more time. Ma mitzvahs kalos nogos bein ba'aretz bein b'chutzar Shabbos chamira lo kol shkein. So certainly in the case of Shabbos, it's no heges bein ba'aretz ubein b'chutzar. And now the Gemara is going to sort of wrap this up with Abaye. Umi di Omar Abaye man tana de polik alei de Rabbi Lozer Rabbi Shmuel. We see from the words of Abaye that the Tana who rejects Rabbi Eliezer is none other than Rabbi Shmuel. So Moshav means Liacha Yerusha v'Yeshiva. And in Chadash it says Moshav. Shall we assume it's not no Heges, Ela B'Eretz Yisrael Bilvad? Shma mina, because it means here that Tanakama is of the opinion that Moshav means Yach Yerusha Yeshiva, therefore Chadash, which also says Moshe Sechem, is limited to Eretz Yisrael. And the other two, Rabbi Eliezer L'Chumra Polig al Tanakama. So again, the Tanakama is Rabbi Shmuel. It's not three shitas. And Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion that even Chadash is noig b'chol makom, and that's L'Chumra Polig. And therefore, according to Rabbi Eliezer, whenever the Torah says Moshav, it means any place that you are living in, even if it's in Chutz La'aretz. Gemara says Shmamina Yesh Lifshot Mikan Rabbi Eliezer Nechlak Lahachmir. So now the Gemara asks a kasha on Rabbi Shmuel. Michti Rabbi Shmuel, who says that whenever it says Moshav, it means Liacha Yerusha V'Shiva Ahechakot Anisachim. If you can assume that in the Parsha Nesachim it says Moshav, is then I'm going to ask you B'Nesachim Bia Umoshav Ksiva. In the case of Nesachim, we have both Bia Kitavo El Eretz Moshe Sechem, and we have Moshe, because the Torah says Moshe. So I think what the Gemara is asking is Pshita, my Kamashma. So we need both Bias Ha'arts together with Moshe. And if the Torah doesn't say Bias Ha'aretz, then what the Torah means anywhere where the Jewish people are settled, even in Chutz La'aretz. Hachikam. This is what Rabbi Shmuel meant to say. L'lamed shekol makom shenemar Bia u'moshav eino elo liacha Yerusha v'yeshiva. Divrei Rabbi Shmuel. So whenever the Torah says both Bia and Moshav, then it means in Eretz Yisrael, but only after Yerusha v'yeshiva. So the implication is that we would derive the Isur Chadash, which means Afal Pisha Nemar Bia u'moshav, Zaficha Chenenoig El Yacha Yerusha v'yeshiva. Frekti Gemari Hachi, Amar Lo, Rabbi Akiva, Harei Shabbos shenemar bo moshavos, v'yomer lei Shabbos kal v'chomer hi. Is Nemolei, and not Bia Umoshav Kaim. We just finished saying that Rabbi Shmuel is based on a combination of Bia Umoshav. So why, when it gets to Shabbos, does he feel that he has to introduce a Kal V'chomer? Why not just say, well, we have Bia Umoshav? Wait a minute. In the case of Shabbos, it says what? It says Moshav. I don't think it says Bia. So therefore, we're going to have to assume that only when we have both Bia and Moshav, whereas in Shabbos it doesn't say Bia, it only says Moshav, and therefore Shabbos is no Heges B'chol Makom. So why did Rabbi Yishmael give that teretz to Rabbi Akiva? He should have slugged up Rabbi Akiva, and he should have said that I'm going to derive from the Sachim that the Sachim apply b'chol makom, because it says both Moshav, and Moshav means Liacha Yerusha v'Yeshiva, and we have Bia. And the Gemara answers, Chadavi Od Kamalei. The argument that Rabbi Shmuel placed against Rabbi Akiva, that's not the main answer that he wanted to give. It's the Tosefes. He just added that to enhance his argument. So what is Rabbi Shmuel's basic argument? Chada, the ana bia umoshav ka'im. When I wanted to derive from the Sachim, Rabbi Shmuel says that the kavana of the Torah is only after Yerusha v'Yeshiva, that's because bia umoshav ka'imna or ka'amina. Now Shabbos has moshav, but it doesn't have bia. V'yod, and furthermore, even according to your logic, that my kavanah was to derive from Moshav and only from Moshav, Dika Amrit, and then you ask me the Kasha Rei Shabbos, Shenever Moshavos, and yet it's a mitzvah Sheno Hegis B'chol Makom. So how does right, that Shabbos, even though it says Moshavos, and it doesn't say Bia, it only says Moshav, and nevertheless it's no Hegis B'chol Makom. The answer is that Shabbos is no Hegis B'chol Makom has nothing to do with the fact that it says Moshav, but Shabbos Kal V'chomer Hi. So the Gemara says now, what is the root of the argument, the debate between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva? Why doesn't Rabbi Akiva hold like Rabbi Shmuel? And Moshav, in the parsha of Nesachim, it means Liacha Yeshiva Yerusha. So more explains, the root of the machlokas between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva is whether or not during the 40 years in the midbar they were makriv nesachim when they brought their karbanos. And if you take a look in the Mefarshim here, they say that it means Karbonis Yachid. Rabbi Shmuel Savalo Kerevu Nesachim Bamidbar. Right, the Chiyav Nesachim to Makriv Nesachim is only Chal later on when they enter into the land. And the only exception to that rule is going to be Nesachim that are brought to accompany the Korban Yochid. Rabbi Akiva Savar Afal Korbanos HaYochid Kerevu Nesachim HaMidbar. Rabbi Shmuel holds that there were no Nesachim in the Midbar, at least as far as the Korban Yochid. And Rabbi Akiva says no. Even for Yochid, they brought Nesachim in the Midbar. So therefore, according to Rabbi Akiva, if they brought Nesachim in the Midbar, it's impossible to say that the Torah's Machadesh, that the Yochid brings Nesachim after they entered into Eretz Yisrael, because it was planted even in the Midbar. Elo, but rather Chidush HaTorah b'Knisos and Lord Tzaya Shayochid Tzorch LaHakriv Nesachim Af B'Bomus Yochid. So here I have a long note. He says here, I Efshel Lefarish Kasher Kosva Torah Moshe B'Parshas Nesachim Kavanosa Hoisa She'ein Ein Nesachim Krevim El Yachid Kedusha V'Yeshiva Ba'aretz. They already were makriv in the midbar. So if they were makriv in the midbar, so you can't say that it's only Liacha Yeshiva, Yerusha V'Yeshiva. Now, once they started being makriv in the midbar, then they continued. So we must conclude that the Torah wanted to tell us that the Nesachim HaKrevim B'chol Makom Shatem Yoshv. Rabbi Haitana de Bei Rabbi Shmuel, the Tana of the Beis Medrash Rabbi Shmuel that the Gemara quoted earlier, that whenever it says Bio Moshav, it means Liacha Yerusha V'Yeshiva. Is Mapik Me'idach Tana de Bei Shmuel. We have another brisa from Tana de Bei Rabbi Shmuel. The Tana de Bei Rabbi Shmuel, Hoil V'Nemru Bios Bator Stam. So in many mitzvahs it says bios, but the Torah doesn't tell you if immediately when they enter into Eretz Yisrael or after a certain period of time is part l'cha kosu b'yechad behem liacha Yerusha v'Yeshiva. So in one case, the Torah is going to tell us that it's even after Yerusha v'Yeshiva. And this is in Dvarim Perek Yud Zayin ki savo ha'aretz v'yeshavtem v'yirishtem v'yeshavtem bava amarta asim alai melech. Is af kol, even in all mitzvahs where it says bia, is it means that einin oheges ela liacha Yerusha v'Yeshiva. So the bottom line is that according to the Tana, even in a place where the Torah says bia and only bia, it means liacha Yerusha v'Yeshiva. That's according to this last Tana. According to the first Tana, then only if it says bia umoshav, right? Only then it means after Yerusha v'Yeshiva. But if it only says bia, then it means that immediately when they enter into Tzol, the mitzvah is no heges. The Idach, and what about Rabbi Shmuel, meaning the first Rabbi Shmuel, who says only if it says both Bia and Moshav, then it means Yacha Yerusha v'Yeshiva. And now the Gemara wants to know why he doesn't learn it from Melech. Okay. So for that, we'll just go back to Abaye. And Abaye was the one who said that Hol v'nemru bios bator stam u'pir l'cha kosu v'echad me'em liach Yerusha v'Yeshiva. And what does he mean, period, v'echad me'em? It means in the Parsha of Melech, in Dvarim Yud Zayin, ki sovo la'aretz, v'yirishtem v'yeshavtem ba, v'yamarta asima alai Melech. So derived from that every mitzvah where it says bia is only no heges liacha Yerusha v'Yeshiva. So Gemara says v'idach, why doesn't the first Tana of Rabbi Shmuel, who holds that you need both bia and moshav in order to indicate liacha Yerusha v'Yeshiva, why doesn't he derive from Melech that as long as it says bia bilvad, that's enough? And the Gemara answers, Mishum dahavi melech ubikurim shnei ksum abam kecher. V'chol shnei ksum v'kom v'kecher ein malam. So we have two psukim that are teaching us the same thing, or similar things. In both cases, it says bia, and the Torah says it's only after Yerusha v'Yeshiva. And that's called Seiksuma Bam Kechne Malam. Because if the Torah would have had in mind B'chol Makom, then the Torah wouldn't have said, it wouldn't have said Bia. So again, just to summarize, well, according to that first Tani, you need both Bia and Moshav in order to establish the requirement of Yerusha v'Yeshiva liachar Yerusha v'Yeshiva. And we're not going to derive from Melech that Bia alone is enough. You need both Bia and Moshav, because Bikurim also the Torah uses the word Bia. It says in Dvarim Chavav, "Hoyeki Savola Arts Hasher v'Yirishta v'Yishavta v'Lakachta v'Yirish" is called Pri Adama. That's the mitzvah Bikurim. So it clearly says Bia. So if the Torah wanted to teach me one, it wouldn't have said it in another context. V'idach, what about Tana Dvei Rabbi Shmuel, the second Tana Dvei Rabbi Shmuel, who derives from Melech that whenever it says Bia, that's enough. And those two cases of Melech who Bikurim tzricha. We don't apply the principle of Shnei Ksuva Bam Kechrei Malamdin because we need the psukim. Meaning, if the Torah wouldn't have written both of them, we wouldn't have known one from the other. If we only had the parsha, the din of Melech, that's only liacha Yerusha v'Yeshiva. V'lo kasa Bikurim hava mina. I would have thought that Melech is noeg liacha Yerusha v'Yeshiva. But Bikurim decomes hani, the owner of the field gets hana from the fact that the animals are eating the pears of the field. Is then lialter. It makes sense that immediately when he enters into Eretz Yisrael, since he's nene, he gets benefit from the payrolls, he should bring his bikurim. It's, so to speak, a matir. But on the other hand, he kasa bikurim. If the Torah had only written a bikurim, that they're no igliacha Yerusha v'Yeshiva. For lo kasa v'melech, havamina only a bikurim, you have to wait till after Yerusha v'Yeshiva, because melech, right? Because we're not talking about a melech, but melech, the darko lichbosh, is lialter. So the king goes out to do milchamos, and therefore, at the time of his kibush, he needs to go out berosham at the head of the pack l'milchama. So therefore, melech bikurim, he can't learn one from the other, and therefore the Torah had to write both of them. And both of them only apply after Yerusha v'Yeshiva, but other Dinei Torah, even if they say Bia, is then we would learn from Melech or from Bikurim that none of them are Noheges until after Yerusha v'Yeshiva. The Idach. And what about the first? We'll go back and forth to the first Tana of Rabbi Shmuel. He holds a Melech Bikurim are considered Shnei Ksuma Bam Kechad. And therefore we don't derive from Melech for other places, because Shnei Ksuma Bam Kechrei Malamdin. So you see that you can derive Bikurim from Melech. And Nichtov Rachmana Melech, says Rabbi Shmuel, the first Rabbi Shmuel, that the Torah could have just said Melech, that Melech is only knowing after Yerusha v'Yeshiva. V'lo boy bikurim. The Torah didn't have to go out of its way to mention the same halach with regard to bikurim. Ana mina, and I would have understood very well. Uma Melech delichbosh. It's logical to say that the din of Melech should be knowing immediately when he enters into the land, because Melech Darko Lichlosh. And nevertheless, the Torah says, you know what? Liacha Yerusha v'Yeshiva will wait. Is Bikurim lo kolshke. So he says here in the Masechet, lo kolshke sheyinagu liacha Yerusha v'Yeshiva. Right? If Melech is only knowing achar Yerusha v'Yeshiva, even though it's it's very pressing and urgent for him to be Mekayim this mitzvah immediately, is then Bikurim lo kolshkein. Certainly in Bikurim, we have to wait until after Yerusha v'Yeshiva. So why did the Torah go out of its way to explicitly mention that it's not knowing until after Yerusha v'Yeshiva? If not to teach me that Shnei Ksuim Bam Ke'echad v'Yenim Alamdin is a principle that we can apply everywhere. The Idach, now we go back to the second Tana, and he holds you cannot derive Bikurim from Melech, and we said it was a Kal V'chomer. No. The Kosav Hachi, if the Torah had only written Melech, that it's not knowing until after Yerusha v'Yeshiva, and it didn't say anything about Bikurim. Hava, I would have thought, Midi Dahavi Achala. Bikurim is always equated to Chala. And in Chala it says, Bia b'vachem el ha'aretz. Asher ani mevi eschem shama tarimu truma l'Hashem. And yet everybody agrees that the chiyuv is chal immediately when they entered into Eretz Yisrael. So therefore, we have a havamina that the din of Bikurim should be identical with the din of chal. And I call modim that is a chiyuv immediately when you enter into Eretz Yisrael. Mashmalah, therefore the Torah to write explicitly in Bikurim, that's not knowing until after Yerusha v'Yeshiva. Okay. Now at this point, the Gemara goes back to what it discussed on Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph, that mitzvah tliya ba'aretz, about which the Mishnah says no heges dafka b'Eretz Yisrael, that's a mitzvah of chovas karka, as opposed to chovas haguf. Why the Torah have to tell us in Shabbos Moshvos Sechem? So the word Moshvos Sechem in Shabbos, in Parshas Emor, Shabbos Hi L'Hashem B'chol Moshvos Sechem is totally superfluous. Shabbos is a Chovas Haguf. It's true. Even though Shabbos is Chovas Haguf, we need Moshvos Sechem. Salke Tait Ramina, I would have entertained the idea Hol Ubinyana Demodos Ksiva. In Parshas Emor, Vayikach Gimel is the Parsha Modos, and then that's where you'll find the Tzivui on Shmir Shabbos. Salkedat Kamina Hoil Binyan Demodos Ksiva Tiboy Kiddush Kimodos. Right, Kiddush is through Bezdin, and Bezdin is only in Eretz Yisrael. So the Moed is only chal through Kiddush, and that's through Bezdin. It's called Mashmalah, and that's what Moshe Sechem is teaching me about Shabbos, that Kiddush Shabbos is Me'eleh. It's not through the Bezdin. So the Gemara has the kasha Moshe of the Kos Rachmana Gabi Chelev V'Dam. The pasuk says, "Vayikra Gimel Chukas Olam Ador Seich B'Chol Moshvos Seichem Kol Chelev V'Chol Dam Lo So Chelu." So again, it says Moshvos Seichem. Lomali. Right, these are Chovas Haguf, Chelev and Dam. So why did the Torah have to go out of its way and write Mimoshvos Seichem? It's wow. Havamina that Chelev and Dam should only apply to in Eretz Yisrael. Salka that can mean a whole vinyan of the Karbonis Ksiva Bismadika Karbon Nitzar Chelev and Dam. Smad the like a Karbon lo Nitzar Chelev and Dam Kamashmala. So again, I don't know. Does the Gemara mean that Chelev and Dam would not be knowing in Chutzarts, or it means we have to wait until the Beis Hamikdash is built? And if there are no karbonos after Churban Abayis, then there's no Isur Chelev and Dam. So now the Chelev and Dam, the Moshel Seichem, is teaching me B'chol Zman. Till now, it was teaching me B'chol Makom. Is Moshav the Koser Achmona Gabi Matzah Umora Lomali? Right, it says B'chol Moshel Seichem Tochlu Matzos. And here we have a classic case of a Chovas Haguf. And we said the Chovas Haguf is no Hegis B'chol Makom. It's and once again, we're going to say that it all depends upon the time that the Beis Hamikdash is up. Salke daitamina holuksil matzum yochlu. You should eat the korban pesach with matzum moror. Is dafka bisman to ika pesach. Right, the Beis Hamikdash is standing in. Then there's a mitzvah of matzah and moror. Bisman the leka pesach, meaning after korban abayis. Well, maybe you have no obligation at all to eat matzah and maror. Mashmalon, that's why the Torah says Moshel Seichem in matzah maror to teach me that these chiyuvim are noeg even if the korban pesach is not noeg. Now the Gemara is going to ask about bia in the case of tefillin and peterechem. Bia the kosver monogabi tefillin upeter chamor. Peter chamor, it says kadesh li kol bechor peter kol rechem voya kiviacha Hashem voyel choli os al yodecha uzikaron beinenecha. Is lomali, and we know that tefillin and Peterechem is noeg b'chol makom. So why did the Torah have to throw us off by mentioning this particular makom? And he answers that, "Humi boilech editanya the Bei Rabbi Shmuel. Asay mitzvah zu," which is a reference to tefillin and petach hamor in the midbar. Shebishvilati konsul oretz. Bishlem Lamandi Omar, who holds at any time the Torah says Moshav, it means Kol Mokom Shatem Yoshvim Mashma. And the mitzvah is no Hegis B'chol Mokom. And this is the Shita of Rabbi Akiva that we had earlier in the Brisa. And according to Rabbi Akiva, the Isur Chadash, where it says Moshav, it doesn't mean that the Isur is only knowing after Yerusha Yeshiva. It only means to tell you that the Isur Chadash is knowing B'chol Makom. Hainu Ditsiv, now I understand why it says in Yoshua, Vayochlu me'avur ha'aretz mimachras ha'pesach, that Bnei Yisrael entered into the land. They ate from the tvua, the new tvua that grew there. And that's the morning after. One second. The question is when they ate the tvua chadosha. And it says here, Mimachras HaPesach. And that's the 16th of Nisan. So the word is Medayik, Mimachras HaPesach HaChol. Right, on the day after Yontiv, which is the 16th of Nisan, they should eat from the new Tvua, but Meikara, or on the first day of Yontiv, Lo Ochel. So again, the chronology seems to be that Bnei Yisrael entered into Eretz Yisrael on the 10th of Nisan, and they didn't eat from the Tvua Chadosha that grew there. And why is that? Because they had man. Alma, let's see if I'm right. Alma. No, because these are Chodesh. I thought because they had a surplus of man. So let's take a look on the top of Lamed Ches, and that's where we'll have to end it. Akruv Omer v'Hadarach. First, they brought the Omer, and that was Mati the Tvua Chadosha Bachila, and then they ate from the Tvua. They couldn't eat from the Tvua on Yontiv because the Yisur Chadash that was Noeg immediately after they entered into Eretz Yisrael. Frekti Gemara Lamandi Omar Liacha Yerusha v'Yeshiva Nechol Yalta. So they should be eating it immediately. So the Gemara says Lo Yitzrichu, they didn't have to eat from it because they had man. Now the Gemara is talking about the extra man, the surplus man. So as long as the man was still in existence, they didn't want to eat from Tvuas HaOretz. After the Pasuk Haman, there was no longer man, then they began to eat Mitvuas HaOretz. And the Gemara now is going to prove, this will do Mitzvah another day, that when Bnei Yisrael entered into Eretz Yisrael, they still had man in their kelim. There was a surplus of man. That's what the Gemara wants to prove in the next piece of Gemara. Okay, then, so let me wish you a great day, and thank you very much.